Hey, welcome back to Journey on the Fly, the podcast. Thank you so much for joining us again tonight. Well, let's just say this. I think you're going to enjoy tonight's guest. His name is, well, I'll tell you in a minute. But right now, I want you to know that, like everybody else says on every other podcast, find Journey on the Fly, the podcast, where all great podcasts can be found. From YouTube, actually Journey on the Fly YouTube channel, we have that there, which we have some fly fishing videos and stuff, but we put the podcast up there as well. iTunes, Google Play, on our website, journeyonthefly.com. And there you'll also find out that we are a full-service fly fishing guide for Western Pennsylvania and certain streams in Central Pennsylvania. So if you're looking to learn the art of fly fishing, wherever you may be in this game, let us know. We can get you out on the stream for half a day or a full day. Or we have, as we were jokingly talking about today, we were going to call them the fly fishers slumber parties, but we didn't think that would go over too well. Nevertheless, they are weekend adventures, 2.5 to 3 days of fly fishing, food, and lodging. Check it out. Let us know. Hit us up. Let's get into the podcast. So tonight I'm joined by what seems to be becoming, through our email conversations, a lifelong friend. He is a fly fisherman, an avid outdoorsman, and he's a husband and a father. And near and dear to my heart on top of all that is that he holds a master's degree in apologetics. What does that mean? Well, let's talk to Mr. Jim Swayze and we will find out. Let me start with just a goofy question, because I kind of like to do that. I know it's kind of run-of-the-mill a little bit with some situations, but I still think it's funny because it gives us an opportunity for everybody else to kind of like settle down a little bit, and maybe even me, because my nerves. I mean, I don't know you well at all, except from reading your blogs and some of those things, and then of course our correspondence. But I made this comment today after I sent you that thing about the being related to Patrick Swayze, which will be a question here in a couple minutes. But I work with a 23-year-old kid at the fly shop job that I have, and I had to like take an hour to explain to him all of it because he's never seen the movie or even heard of it. So then I told the owner, he comes in and he gets it all right away, and we're like cracking up. I'm thinking to myself, this is a guy that I'm going to be friends with for a long time. We just need to get together and fish. So, so if you were stuck at any particular age, like the Stone Age, the Iron Age, the medieval times, whatever, what age do you think it would be and why?
Yeah, I've given this thought. So first of all, the answer to this question revolves around two of my greatest interests. First of all, I love sort of the medieval era. It's very. I studied a lot of C.S. Lewis, and Lewis was a medieval scholar, and so one of the answers might be medieval England. Now the medieval was 1,000 years, so there's a lot of time in there. Probably not during the Black Death. That wouldn't be that exciting. But during the good times and healthy times would be the first answer. But the second answer, I think, trumps it, because I'm thinking of fly fishing. And one of the thoughts was, well, if I went back to, say, 1790, somewhere in Yellowstone National Park, man, the fishing would be unbelievable. I mean, unbelievable. Only problem is I'd probably get an arrow through me. So, I would say now. I think now is really the golden era of fly fishing, at least for trout, in my opinion.
I like that. Now, let me back up a minute with part of that question. So I don't know what it is because I'm not a scholar in that world at all. But there is a draw, personally, to me, to those medieval type of times where, obviously there's some of it that's completely literally myth and made up, which is kind of cool about it all, because it seemed to be almost organically comes out of what was going on and how things were then. But do you think your draw is from Lewis, or did you have a little bit of that already coming into Lewis and your attraction to him and his writings and the worlds that he created?
Yeah, now that is a really good question. I hadn't thought about it, but I, I'm not the only person in the world who thinks the medieval times, if you will, were kind of a romantic time period. In the sense that there's something really attractive about it. Man, the Western man hasn't yet sort of started to think that he's independent, started to think that he doesn't need God. There's a really cool video actually out there on YouTube by a scholar named Anthony Esselin, and he's talking about why the Middle Ages aren't dark. They really weren't dark ages. He says the universities were created during this time period. He says with nothing more than chisels and pulleys, they built these Gothic cathedrals, etc. You've got that piece of it, and then you've got the piece where everybody seems to be so attracted to these medieval festivals, to the jousting and to the legends of Arthur and that sort of thing. There's something pretty romantic about it that that was certainly a part of my worldview, if you will, way before I ever studied Lewis. So you're right about that.
Interesting. Very cool. So let's do this, since everybody's asking probably right now, who in the world am I talking to? So, and I am pronouncing it correctly to say Swayze.
Right.
Okay. So Jim Swayze, introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about like who you are and the things that you feel comfortable, obviously, admitting to the public here.
Well, I'm going to try not to admit anything that gets me arrested. We can talk about that afterwards. But yeah, Jim Swayze. I grew up in Texas. Also spent a good amount of time in Colorado as well. A little bit better fishing conditions in Colorado when you like trout and a size 16 Adams or something, whatever I was fishing with when I was a kid. But yeah, so I graduated from Southern Methodist University, or SMU, here in Dallas, just down the street from me. Studied philosophy and English. Then went back on to get a master's in something called apologetics, specifically cultural apologetics, which is even difficult for me to define. And I spent a good portion of my time now these days when I'm not fishing, particularly in Yellowstone National Park, but anywhere in the West. I spend a good deal of my time teaching. I'm currently teaching a class on Narnia and the Seven Heavens is the name of the class. Based on Dr. Michael Ward's research around what the hidden structure is behind the whole Narnia thing. Do a lot of philosophy. This is where you get into the difference between imaginative apologetics and then your standard proposition or philosophical apologetics, where you're saying, God exists because of X, Y, or Z. But yeah, I just like to think. I like to fly fish. A little bit weird. I'm a lot weird. Very lucky my wife puts up with a good deal of this. But in terms of the Swayze thing, which I think you were alluding to, okay, so here's the deal. Yes, we are related. Every Swayze, if you hear somebody named Swayze, we're all related. And I'm going to give you a brief history overview. This may be the point at which we just hang up and go on to the next podcast. I certainly know my kids would go running from the room, but I'm going to tell you a quick story about the Swayzes.
Please.
And I'll put some Patrick in there as well. So we came over. We came over from sailed from Dorset, England, in 1632, and arrived in the new town of Salem, Massachusetts, way before the witch trials happened. And my direct ancestor was a guy named John Swayze. He was a young guy, either 12, maybe 13, something like that. Came over with his sister and his his brother-in-law, right? And so they were both adults. By the time he reached the age of majority, he was getting some land in Salem. 1650, he sold that, moved to Long Island, New York. We were there for 100 years, stopped over in Jersey for about 40 years. But just about the time the Revolutionary War was going to break out, there was rumors of war. We were, and I'll probably get some boos out there for this, but we were loyalists. We were loyal to the king. We'd actually been granted some land in Mississippi by the king. And we're told, if you leave, probably a good idea to hightail it out of New Jersey and head towards Mississippi. And so in 1772, 1773, went to what is now, actually then as well, Natchez, Mississippi, Fort Natchez. And we're there for quite a while. Until the boll weevil basically cleared a lot of people out of the South, and then we moved to Texas. And so Patrick's family is a part of that. His direct ancestor and my direct ancestor were, I think it was my great grandfather, something like that, maybe great great grandfather. And so he ended up coming to the Dallas area. We ended up going to the San Antonio area. And eventually his family ended up in Houston. We ended up in Dallas. So certainly knew him a little bit, and not a lot. And also his family was, everybody went back to Natchez for the reunion every year. So that's way more than you want to know about the Swayze family.
Not exactly. It's impressive and wonderful that you know that much depth of your family and more, because I'm sure that you that's the succinct version of all that. So that's cool alone. But I appreciate you sharing that. That's one of those things that kind of kick myself in the tail for not doing a little bit more kind of historical investigation on our roots, because our last name is spelt different. Because some names, you have that namesake where you can figure out, like Mr. Smith or something. Ours is like, I think somebody just got mad somewhere down the line, and there's the Cormans that are Corma that probably have some kind of link to the grain, where they just got mad and said, we're putting a K on it. We don't want to be associated with you anymore. And it puts mystery into it where I'm like, I don't even know where to start, but
yeah. Yeah. I think if you could easily do the same thing to Swayze, somebody would have done it along the lines, but there's Harvey Korman, the actor from the 70s who was on the Carol Burnett show and all that. If you haven't seen Harvey Korman, you got to go look him up on YouTube. The guy was hilarious.
That is how, when somebody looks at me and needs to spell my name, and I know their age, like roughly, that's my association with them. Is I say Harvey's the only person that's famous with our last name, and they're like, oh yeah. And then of course, if it's 30 years or younger, or even 40 years or younger, they'll just look at me like, okay. But nevertheless.
Well, yeah. Well, my kids could probably, my daughter's 18. She could probably, she could definitely tell you who Harvey Korman was, but that's only because her weird dad was trying to make her watch Tim Conway and Harvey Korman videos.
That's all part of culturing your kids, right?
It's all part of the plan. It's all part of the plan.
Well, okay, Jim, I want to save the fly fishing stuff for like kind of halfway here, a little bit later, because it all kind of works together, I think. But you said a couple things that I think need unpacked, that I have ideas on them and understanding of them, but I want people to know, because I'm not going to lie, there's a little bent on my podcast because I am a follower of Christ. So those things are going to come up an awful lot, but I don't only interview people who are Christians or strictly saying, even religious for that matter, because I want to hear all kinds of voices. But to me, a lot of it all connects anyways. So it's just part of my worldview coming through here, and I'm not going to apologize for that. But you said something about, and I'm going to make the standard joke that you've probably heard 100 times just for my audience. So you said you have a degree in apologetics, and you also said you're married. So does that mean that you are a professional degreed apologizer? What does that mean?
I am. No, it means exactly that. It does not, by the way, mean that I'm not constantly in trouble anyways. But I'm at least good at the apologizing part. Plato's got, or actually Socrates has nothing on me. Yeah, no, I mean, I try being a dad joke expert, I try to incorporate that into daily conversation. So I'm just glad to hear somebody at least let me talk about it a little bit.
Now, you said specifically cultural apologetics. Did you study under Dr. Ordway?
I did.
You did?
Yes.
Okay. Because I have one of her books here, which is actually Imaginative Apologetics, which go out and pick that book up, whoever's listening to this, and you'll enjoy it thoroughly, especially if you're a believer. But what constitutes a degree in apologetics? What does that look like? What does it do for you? How do you use that?
Yeah. So basically, I've spent most of my life as what we call a management consultant in the technology area, and it's just been a horrible fit for me personally. My wife, the one to whom I apologize all the time, and I'm sorry, honey, if you hear this, but she sort of expected me to do things like pay the bills and that kind of stuff. And so she's actually, since the kids are grown now, has gone back to work. But during that time period, I was expected to make a little bit of money. And I said, I could be a professor. And she said, no. And I said, I could be a fly fishing guide. And she said, absolutely not. And so I said, well, I guess I gotta go to technology. But when I was, listen, I want to say I'm young. I'm not young, but I'm very immature. And so when I was approaching my 50th birthday, I said, I'm gonna go and kind of do what I want to do. And we're at the point where the kids are getting older. I've got 4 kids. We just about got the last one out of the house. And so I'm going to go and get a degree, some sort of degree related to theology, right?
Okay.
So I started kind of poke around, and then I remembered a wonderful series that I'd listened to with a group called the Teaching Company, and they have these courses on DVD back in the day, CD, etc. They used to be back on cassette, apparently, way back in the day. And there was one of the professors was a gentleman named Louis Markos, and it was Louis Markos on C.S. Lewis. And so I thought, well, I'm kind of interested in Lewis, but I don't want any of that Narnia business, right? I'm a grown up. I don't want any of that Narnia, but I'll go ahead and listen, give it a listen. I'm driving back and forth to work anyways. I might as well. And I just absolutely fell in love with Lou Markos and what he had to say. And so I sent him a letter. I said, hey, and this was, by the way, during the, it's not as if I'm that old. I mean, I could have emailed him, but, I thought, well, I'm just going to send the guy a letter. So I sent him a letter. He replied back, can you please email me? I said, sure. And we just kind of struck up a friendship a little bit. And so I started talking to him, how do you do what you do? How'd you get into it? And he said, well, listen, I've got a couple books. You ought to read them. One of them was called Louis Agonistes, which is his book about Louis wrestling with God and eventually coming to the faith. And then I realized that he was at a place called Houston Baptist University. And I thought, what in the world? I mean, this sounds a little bit lower than a community college, but I'll give it a shot. Nothing against community colleges. Went to one myself. But I ended up looking there, finding out they had an apologetics program run by a woman named Holly Ordway. They had Michael Ward of Oxford as one of the teachers. And I thought, I think this is it. And started taking classes. And with my background, not just philosophy, but also in English literature, I kind of fell in love with the cultural part over the philosophical. And so what that entails is, it's in effect apologetics, right? Defense of the Christian faith, but from a more of an imaginative standpoint. And so that's how I ended up in all this.
So introduced, and I'll put links. So I probably should have brought on. I didn't realize you were going to mention things like CDs and DVDs. So we should probably dial in Ted Wright again, who's an archaeologist, so he can give us descriptions on these artifacts.
Yeah, he's probably come across a few in his wandering around the base of Mount Ararat or whatever.
But when he introduced me in kind of, the Facebook way to you, and he sent me an email and was describing you in sense, it's kind of funny because you hold the master's degree that I would love to have one day, because I have this, and not to make the show about me, but it seems to be kind of relevant. So I have this twisted religious background where I was like this combination of a fundamentalist and a charismatic believer, all in the same thing. So my introduction to, or my first reaction to C.S. Lewis and the World of Narnia was a knee-jerk reaction, like, oh no, you don't get involved with that fantasy stuff. You stay away from that, because that's where the devil tracks. And you come to find out later that, and say something to this, because I think there's some things that are really important here for people to hear. And I know you probably have something to say to this. It seems very important for Christians and everybody to realize that, one, I don't think the imagination finds much footing in a world orchestrated and ran solely by naturalism. But
Right.
What would you say to that, and also maybe some encouragement or even a way to present that, an encouraging way to believers to use that and what it means, and connection to God and so forth?
Yeah, yeah. No, I get it. And I came from a Southern Baptist background, and we had that theme. There's also this sort of anti-intellectual intellectual thing, if you will, that runs through at least the Southern Baptist, and I would assume your background as well.
Yeah.
There's just this sort of nervousness whenever we get all fancy and talk about anything that is sort of outside, extra biblical, if you will. So they talk about imaginative apologetics, and that begins with, that conversation really begins, by going back to Lewis, Tolkien, as well as some of the other inklings. But Lewis, in probably the worst titled essay in human history, he titled this thing, I can't even say it, Blus Spells and Flallen Spheres. I mean, God bless me, it sounds like I just sneezed. So Lewis, in this essay, argued, and I think fairly persuasively. I think I'd be interested in seeing if there's any people who are into psychology or the biochemistry related to that, et cetera. But he argued fairly convincingly that basically that while reason, and these are almost exactly his words, where reason is the organ of truth, imagination is the organ of meaning. Mm-hmm. And anybody who's been to any of my classes, they probably just roll their eyes, because I say this all the time. It's sort of a key to understanding Lewis and a key to understanding imaginative apologetics. So what that means is you can have a lot of data. The way our brain works is that data comes in, right? And then we have this, but we have to be able to look at patterns to be able to make any sense out of it all. And so when a young baby gets the same data that we do, but it takes time to develop what my wife says, the wrinkles in your brain, to get to the point where you have enough experience to where you can start to make sense of things. And so this is true of data as well. I'm not going to name any names. We can all probably think of a biblical scholar, who just can repeat the doctrine really well and can repeat the stories and knows what chapter and verse, et cetera, if you're looking for a particular biblical reference, and yet who doesn't get it. Yeah. And it's always a shock to me to find that there's somebody who, gosh, I don't know, they may be at Duke, for instance, and they understand, but they miss the point, right? And so what Lewis would say is, and actually I have an experience with this, I'll share with you in a second. What Lewis would say is, you know, they sort of lack the imagination, not in the Walt Disney sense. Don't think of, I don't know, My Little Pony trotting down the middle of the street with sparkles everywhere. But the imagination literally means to take doctrine, cold doctrine, and turn it into, put flesh on it as Christ took flesh. And so here's the story for you. When I was, my wife it's actually partially her fault that I ended up studying imaginative apologetics because she was reading Narnia, and she'd read it several times. And she said, "You got to read this." And I said, "Oh, no. I'm a serious person. I don't read children's stories." You know, I didn't say it quite that way, but it was just about as snotty. And she said, no. And she kept bugging me about it. Fine. I'll read the children's stories. And I stand by this statement. I never knew Christ until I knew Aslan. I never knew Christ until I knew Aslan, because I understood. I got the doctrine. I could recite it to you. But imagination, reason's the organ of truth, but imagination is the organ of meaning. And so it is through these fictional works that we actually can understand, sometimes grasp for the first time, the meaning of something. You know, the meaning of Christ taking on flesh, the meaning of the resurrection, the meaning of his being crucified. What did all these things mean? Well, look at Aslan.
Wow. I absolutely love that. And earlier on in our email communications, I happened to make a comment because I enjoy this world too. I just, my I don't know what to call it. I guess my studying character is that more of a steamrolling or a steam engine where you got to keep shoveling the coal until it's hot enough. And then it's, God forbid we're going uphill. And that just, it keeps going and going. So I have to compile a lot in order to regurgitate and then eventually articulate what I'm learning and things like that. But it's one of those things, like I'm staring literally as you're mentioning people like Dr. Ordway and Michael Ward, his After Humanity, the companion to the Abolition of Man. And it's just a world of faith and part of the I'll call it the Christian culture that has been, in my view, left out and missed. And trying to introduce people to this, it almost seems like I have a sense of urgency to it. And I happen to mention it's actually the title to one of oh Lord, I'm forgetting his name. I'm so sorry. Peter Kreeft's is it Kreeft? Is it Kreeft's book?
Yeah.
There's Holes in the Walls of the World, I think is the name of the book.
Okay.
And he sets up that where the world of Aslan gives you this imaginative approach to the life of Christ and the types and things like that Lewis masterfully sets up. And I agree 100% with you. We watch it. We actually put together, we didn't get to use it because we got negative 30-degree temperatures on our Christmas Eve service, but we actually took Narnia and we're bringing it to life with some kind of corresponding biblical readings, music, and then reading from the kids were going to read from Narnia. And we had the light post all set up and everything. And then it got washed out because of negative 30-degree temperatures. But we just see it, how important it is, because the Scripture comes alive. Those things were real. I mean, it's real history. And I said this before to somebody else that, it's a way in which Jesus actually spoke. He used that sideway language so much, those parables to I think, cause that organ of meaning to be used when he was in contact with people. Do you have any thoughts on that, or you just want to hang up and say this guy's an idiot?
No, I'd like to hang up right now. No, no, I'm kidding. No, you're exactly right. I mean, there's a reason why Jesus spoke in story, right? He spoke in parable. And gosh, the thing that comes to my mind, and I haven't thought about this much, but this just kind of popped into my head. that maybe the imagination I was talking about before, in the sense of truly understanding who Christ is, who God is, who the Spirit is, who humanity is for that matter, and who the devil and, all of his fellow fallen angels are, may have something to do with the fact that you maybe you have to have the Holy Spirit as a actor in that somehow, to allow you to understand. Because I can tell you that a lot of times earlier on, when I was what I would call a superficial Christian, in retrospect, I didn't understand the parables, and now they make sense to me, right? Let those who have ears hear. And just like Milton in Paradise Lost invokes the muse, although he's really invoking the Holy Spirit instead of invoking the muse like the Greek writers would have. He's actually asking the Holy Spirit to come so that he can justify the ways of God to men. And maybe there's a connection with all that.
Which is a perfect segue into this world of fly fishing, because for me, it is so in the shop, whether I'm doing a class or I'm on the stream with somebody, I am adamant about everything we do with intention. From the time we walk up to the edge, to the bank of a stream, to where we step and how we step, what we do next, is all important. But I'm very adamant about the expectations of going on a stream. And one of the things that I try very hard to convey is that catching a trout or a smallmouth, whatever the critter is that we're, quote, after that day, is only the icing on the cake. If you think that fly fishing is about catching a fish and getting it to the net only, and first and foremost, there is a world that you are going to miss. And fly fishing will never be what I think it really is. It's two things for sure. It's incredible amounts of therapy. But then I also think it helps open the cracks up to see a world beyond the world that we're experiencing. And but by that, what I mean is very real, that the awe and the wonder and the gratitude that we experience from the beauty of the trout to the sophistication of how hydraulics works, and the fact that a trout has, a brain the size of my thumbnail, but yet outsmarts us all the time, it seems. But it exists there, especially, wild trout, which of course are most people's favorite, at least they're mine. And here you are, I'm looking at your bio and all this, and it's so funny because even on Facebook, it's, husband, apologist, fly fisher. I don't know if it's all in that same order, but I'm like, did this guy steal my profile? I guess you're older than me by a little bit, so I guess maybe I stole your profile. But so talk to us about, introduce that. Does that I know it makes sense to you, but what do you have to say to that? Because we want to also talk about actual fly fishing, because you have spent a couple minutes in the Yellowstone Basin and in the drainage there. So I want to talk about that, because you got a few moments you've done some fishing there. So what do you think?
Yeah. So I mean, this is a perfect setup, to sort of at the end of the day. Now here's the problem. You just asked a guy who has sort of a philosophical mind as well, which I think you do as well, by the way. But why do you do fly fishing? Mm-hmm. All right, I'm gonna start. We need to get Robert Redford in here to help us with this one, because it's gonna get all poetic and stuff. But so the intentionality. Let me put it to you this way: my ideal, perfect fly fishing moment is one in which I've sort of identified a fish, or maybe I've said, this is an extremely likely spot for a fish. Maybe it's behind a rock. Maybe it's along the edge of a bank. I've made a fairly good, educated guess as to what that trout might actually bite, what fly they may actually take. I don't, by the way, have to wait for a hatch to begin fishing, like some seem to want to do. I'm okay with just saying, it's probably this time of year, it's probably midge time, or, maybe it's earlier, whatever, or maybe right now would be a good time for some of the caddis to start moving around. And so the funnest thing to me is to sort of figure all that stuff out. It's a mental game. All the while, I'm sort of creeping on my knees, because I know that if this guy sees me, I'll tell you, put it this way. I'll put it in a negative way. Some of my fishing buddies who I love, and they know I love them, just come traipsing up to this. They come walking up the stream, clumping in their big, huge, heavy Sims boots. They're standing there in a lumberjack shirt, that you can see from space. I've got a reel on that's, super shiny. They do everything they possibly can not to catch that fish. I like to creep up on them. I like to be cat-like and think about it. And when I finally catch that fish, the guy could be, and I'm not kidding, he could be 4 inches long. I'd prefer he was 24 inches long, but he could be 4-inch fish given the right conditions. But to me, it's all about putting those pieces together and really being intentional and being sort of a part of things rather than I'm just going to come up there, catch a fish, put it on Instagram, and be done with the day.
So my take on my approach like that when I'm taking clients out is I've tried to describe myself as more of a liaison, where I'm introducing those people to that habitat and to the critters that live in that habitat. And
right.
In order to do that, I think you have to do exactly what you just said. You have to not be just the intruder there. You have to almost, as bizarre, for lack of better terms, in a sense, become one with what's happening there. Understanding that fish and understanding, how it sees, what it sees, the fact that it feels, the fact that speed travels 5 times, or sound travels 5 times faster in water than it does out. And all those elements come together if you're approaching things with intention that way. And that's awesome. It's fantastic to hear that, because I think all that takes a lifetime to learn and to apply and to constantly be adjusting. So, excuse me, you have a blog. Actually, you have a couple blogs, but you have a blog about your Yellowstone adventures. And then you also have a blog about some of the more philosophical things that you live and digest and so forth. Tell us about that blog a little bit and help me pronounce it, because I'm not an English major. And I hack words up. When I know people have English backgrounds and I send emails, I'm like, oh dear Jesus, please give me mercy, because
I know.
Yeah.
Hey, listen, I'm talking to a fly fishing guide about fly fishing, so I get it. No, I understand. So one of the things that kind of gives away my weirdness as well is that I studied Latin in both high school and college a little bit.
Oh wow.
And so depending upon whether you're using, oh my gosh, this is so nerdy. Depending upon whether you're doing it from some sort of an ecclesial standpoint, you would say ad chilos, or classical Latin would be ad kylos. It just means to the heavens. And I'm specifically referring, this is the blog that has to do with philosophy and theology. And I'm specifically referring in this title to that medieval model of the 7 heavens that Michael Ward wrote so eloquently about when referring, when he figured out sort of the key to Narnia. But that's what that's about. And I'm glad you got a chance to check it out. It's just me. An idea comes to me, and I like to write about it a little bit. And I've got a few people following who will occasionally comment, et cetera.
Yeah, I love it, actually. It's very inspiring to me, because my son is a prolific writer. He turns 15 in a couple months, and he has been putting comic books and stories together literally for 10 years. And it's one of those things that it was difficult at first for us as parents to encourage, because we couldn't find a summer writing camp. They don't exist around here. And so if he was into baseball, that would have been easier. Well, it wouldn't have been easier because I'm not that big of a baseball fan, but nevertheless. So he's always on me. He's like, Dad, you need to do a diary. Dad, you need to make a journal. Dad, you need to, write your biography and all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, you know what, bud, you can have the rights to all that stuff. Although I love to do it, I'm just so fearful because I got to send it out for people to edit. And then it's like, now I feel like an idiot. But so this is inspiring to me on a personal level. It is, because there's room for it on my website. And I think it's incredibly helpful to take life and lay it out to people. And it's like you said, when ideas come to you here or there, and probably a lot of times on the stream or when you're in the midst of a book, to present that to people in a few words that they can take in, they can chew and spit, they can just absorb it and be there in the moment with you for a little while.
Yeah, I think so. Let me say one thing that comes to mind when you're talking is that one of the things that I found, it kind of hit me in the head sometime in the last year or two, during all this COVID craziness. We've all had a chance to kind of shift gears a little bit and hang out in different places or not go to places we're used to going, et cetera. But I think it's caused a lot of us to, sort of benefit by shifting the way we think about things a little bit. For instance, I'm thankful to be able to go to the grocery store now or whatever. But one of the things I was thinking about during COVID and during all of this has just escaped me. I've just forgotten what it was. But the point being that here's what it was, right? This will be good for your podcast for me to ramble on. Here's what it is this idea that when we pray, we expect that God will answer us, and I've seen a lot of times people who are sort of, what I'll say, waffling in the faith, kind of wondering whether God's really there. One of the things I found out is that God speaks through other people, and maybe even most of the time, right? And so a lot of times the answer really is, one time I got literally, it wasn't, thunderbolt or, a lightning bolt from the sky or thunder or anything like that. But one time I literally got a message, hey, dummy, talk to people, get out, talk to people. And one of the things I found was that a lot of times if you read somebody's blog, if you listen to their podcast, if you pick up a magazine and read an article, or, if you go out, hang out with friends, or you go to church and hang out with your friends there, that a lot of times the answer you're looking for comes from the mouths of others or from the pages of a blog of somebody else. And so I've had people come to me and say, hey, you wrote you did kind of a little bit of a series in your blog on marriage, on Christian marriage in particular. This has really helped us. We never thought about it this way, or you've kind of turned on a light for us. And everybody has that, not just that power, but I think everybody has that calling to when you get ideas about something, not to just keep them to yourself or even to your small circle, but get them out there.
I love that. So let's semi-shift gears here. So being that it literally is in this order, Christian apologist, fly fisherman, I'm assuming, and let us know this, that fly fishing is important to you. It seems like you've been doing it for a while. So where did that come from? Who introduced you? How did you find your way into the world of fly fishing, and how important is it to you today as a father, as a husband, and so forth, and all that?
Yeah, it's huge. And so just, my personality type, everybody's got their own way. I think probably the best way to describe me is, if you want an image, right, is think of this a monarch butterfly expert that's holed up in his basement with his magnifying glass, and he's looking at the wings of the monarch butterfly, and he's just nerding out on it. And if you ever want to go somewhere and talk to an expert on monarch butterflies, which probably no one does, but if somebody did, then there's that guy there down in the basement. Well, I'm like that with fly fishing Yellowstone National Park. Now, I started fly fishing. I remember my first memory is, I mentioned before, the Adams, sort of the classic old fly that, at least in the West, where I do most of my fishing, you don't see a lot of people using it anymore. But I started my fly fishing, or one of the earliest memories is casting an Adams to a just absolutely placid lake at Maroon Bells, which is near Aspen. and to my great shock, finding that a fish actually was fooled by the fact that there was a size 2 atoms on a Zebco line or something, and so that was when I was fairly young. And then, I'm one of the river runs through it guys. Kind of got away from it. I did some fishing. My wife's brother lived in Manitou Springs, Colorado, and so he would take us to little lakes that we could hike to around there. But when river runs through it came out, of course, I really caught the bug, like a whole lot of people of my age, and then. Around early 1997, my wife was trying to figure out a way that my father and I could get together and hang out a little bit more. We've got a great relationship, but anytime you've got the ability to go on a trip with somebody, you're going to develop either a closer relationship or you're going to kill each other. And so she had this idea. Hey, listen, why don't you go to Yellowstone National Park with your father? And so in 1997, we did exactly that, flew into Bozeman, Montana, and I was already fly fishing and had been for several years, but I absolutely fell in love. And so for quite a few years, I was going up there 2 or 3 times a year to fish. And when they closed the park, I would fish on the Madison, or I would fish on, the Ruby or the Beaverhead, or any Henry's Fork, etc. So I like to think that I know a little bit about the park. The 3 times I've been with a guide, there have been times where I've felt like, I don't want to humiliate the person, but I kind of sort of like going, actually, but yeah, I mean, I just absolutely love it. I feel like I know sort of every rock and that sort of a thing. And of course, there's 10 million things I don't know, but it's certainly a passion for me.
And that's with all of us, if we're honest. Fly fishing is the one sport that if a person is honest, it will humble them every time they go out.
Truth.
Excuse me. So, Yellowstone, do you have a favorite trip or a favorite section that you find yourself, no pun intended, navigating to more often than not?
Yes. Yeah. So couple of things. First of all, if anybody here is interested in just sort of one place, the one place that to me is the most special in the park, that would be Slough Creek. And so this is in the northeastern corner of the park. The northeastern corner of the park, by the way, is the least visited. It looks like it's sort of the Serengeti of Yellowstone. It just looks like Serengeti for whatever reason. The Lamar runs through it, and upstream from the Lamar, you've got Soda Butte Creek coming in. So Soda Butte, the Lamar, Slough Creek, and all of these come together and eventually end up in the Yellowstone River itself. But these are the trout that God put there. These are Yellowstone cutthroat. By and large, you've got some rainbow in the lower reaches of, for instance, Slough Creek below at the campground area. But Slough Creek is probably the place. And if you want some sort of tips on what to do and where to go, you go over to my website, which is fireholecanyon.com. And there's a blog there. The last blog post that I made a little while back tells you some kind of hints about what to do in Slough Creek. But that's a special place. It's open right now. Actually, not right now, but when the park reopens in the summer, it was a place that was upstream of where some of the roads washed out, so you can actually get to it. I'm not sure you'll be able to get to Lamar to Soda Butte this year, but that's a wonderful, wonderful location. This is the northeastern corner of the park. Now the most famous, the most famous rivers in the park are the Madison and the Firehole and the Yellowstone River itself. And I've spent probably more time on the Firehole than anywhere else. It's just a strange trout stream. Strange trout stream, but beautiful. You got to do the Firehole. You got to try to fish the Madison, some tough fishing, and you got to do the Yellowstone at what used to be called Buffalo Ford, and it's now called Nez Perce Ford, where you've got the big fish that come out of the lake to spawn, and then by the time it opens around July the 15th, are mostly headed back up into the lake.
Oh, I'm staring at the photograph from that that particular blog post, and did you just say something? I'm just kidding.
No, I was just talking to myself a little bit.
So one of the gentlemen that I work with, the younger fella, is he has been out west a number of times, and he is waiting on the Lord to provide him a kidney. And so we can all please be praying for him for that. And he is constantly talking. And I don't mind it, Dirk, when you hear this, about the West. And he's a hopper guy too, which is funny. I'm like, well, hopper season doesn't come in, in Pennsylvania too often. It's a pretty rarity. But he's just going to, you're probably going to break his face with smiles as he hears you describing some of these areas that I know that he's been to, and off the beaten path stuff too, which is his game mostly, which I love about him. So in the world of fly fishing, I know some people kind of have their niches. For me, you'll get the dry or die guys come in, and I'll listen. I love them. I'll talk to them all day. We'll go dry fly fishing, whatever. And then there's the guys that are, nothing but subsurface, which I get accused of that sometimes, but that just means you haven't fished with me. Yes, I spend a lot of my time subsurface because that's where the fish spend a lot of their time eating if I actually want to catch a fish. But you mentioned that earlier. You said, you're not waiting on a hatch in a sense. Do you have a niche in there that you like, or a particular, like you mentioned, and I know this is like 10 questions at once. But you mentioned that the fire hole was an interesting piece of water. So,
right.
So answer that question first, because that just intrigues me on a fly fishing level. Like, why is it just really peculiar to you?
Yeah. So I mean, the fire hole is the stream that gathers the water from the three major thermal basin, three of the four major thermal basins in the park. The first being West Thumb, which is really empties into Yellowstone Lake, but you've got the upper geyser basin, the middle geyser basin, the lower geyser basin, all along the Firehole River. And if you go to probably the most famous spot, and I actually don't recommend going here unless it's in the fall or maybe early in the season in June, because there's so many people there. But there's a famous Muleshoe Bend on the Firehole River, and if you fish Muleshoe Bend, it's one of those bends out where you can stand there and cast, your fly and just watch the thing drift all the way around the Muleshoe Bend, and you get this just enormous drift. There's a reason why it's kind of famous, but there's also a geyser like right next to the stream, that's spitting stuff up into the stream. You've got you may turn around and find that you've got a herd of, I'm still calling them buffalo. Everybody calls them bison. That's appropriate, but you've got a herd of buffalo standing behind you, sometimes almost sniffing the back of your vest. I mean, these things are dangerous. But if you're standing there and you're fishing, then the logic goes, listen, I don't want to be stomped to death, but I did just see your eyes over there. And so it's just a weird thing. The fact that it's possible, although not probable in this part of the park, to have a grizzly bear go ambling by while you're fishing. All of these things just make it just a really, really odd thing. You actually downstream from the Firehole, close to the Firehole, actually inside the Firehole Canyon area, you can, and there's actually a swimming area too, where you can go in and swim, and the springs are such that it's warm enough in the summertime to take a dip without, feeling like a Norwegian or something.
Oh man, I'm getting, so we're headed to the Adirondacks for our longer vacation this year. So nice. I'm prepping and trying to draw every person that I know that's either lived there or fished there, and then trying to find some literature to do some digging on. And this is just so the 4-year plan that we discussed was, and this is all, of course, God willing, that you know, we're going to, do New York, and then we're going to shift into Vermont, into the greens or the whites, I forget exactly, and then New Hampshire, which is either the whites or the green mountains, and then eventually into Maine. I definitely want to eventually get into, actual landlocked salmon and things like that are further up in there in the New England, and of course into actual legitimate original brook trout that are just incredibly highly sought after, that a lot of people will never get their hands on just because of where you got to go to get them.
Yeah.
But this is just, I want to redo the 4-year plan now and be like, well, maybe we'll just start heading out west. But I mean, we want to do it. We want to do it as a family. We're all drawn to that. And my wife doesn't necessarily fly fish, although I have a trick to get her to fly fish in a reasonable way. So anytime it's like one of our birthdays, or it's Father's or Mother's Day, we designate that whole weekend to whatever that person wants to do, and we follow. So I save my Father's Day for when we go away on vacation, and then it's a day or two of, hey, we're going to hit the stream together. And which is always, here's the funny part with this. And I'll get in trouble for saying this, but it's good trouble. So we usually go in June-ish sometime, like a lot of people, but then our anniversary is in August. So we do this fishing thing in Spring Creek in central Pennsylvania for Father's Day over our vacation. And then we roll back into central Pennsylvania to do our anniversary. And my wife says to me, she goes, what do you think about going fishing before we go to dinner? And I'm like, what? And I'm like, you know what? Let me pray about that. But it was it was really cool because she experienced that connection, that awe, that moving, that relaxation, and everything that it is. That anybody that fly fishes that's listening to this understands that.
Nice. And I have a story, by the way, to tell you. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but
no,
please let me tell you. Yeah. So my wife is not really into fly fishing either, but very, very annoyingly, she's an amazing caster. I mean, she's amazing at casting. So I quote bought her a Sage fly rod for Christmas a few years back. Well, it was 20 years ago, probably now. And since she hasn't been using it that much, I pull it out occasionally. Just to make sure it stays in good shape. Well, anyways, we're in Yellowstone, and we're driving along. She doesn't want to fish the whole time, and I don't blame her, but she's being very, very sweet, to go out there, and she wants. I assume she wants to fish a little bit. Well, we come up to the Gibbon River. Now, if there's one stream in the park that looks like Spring Creek in Pennsylvania, right? Mm-hmm. It would be the Gibbon. I mean, this water is smooth. These fish are very smart. The temperature is relatively constant. It's in effect a Spring Creek because it's getting this water from one of the geyser basins upstream, and so it's relatively, warm, stable, everything you need to grow a big brown trout. Mm-hmm. Well, there's a guy staying there, and he's sort of, I don't like to. But I am going to go ahead and do this though. Let's just say he's in a convertible Corvette, and he looks like he's there to catch the biggest fish around. A convertible Corvette, which I thought was something. But anyways, guy's out there fishing and everything like that. We come walking up. He's very annoyed, which I might be as well. We try to stay away from him, give him room and that kind of stuff. But we're trying to get to a part of the stream that's kind of on the other side of him. Well, I'm over there, put my gear down. I'm starting to get the flies out, starting to think about what are we doing here? What do we think? Are we going to go something super small, like literally a, size 18 Betis or something on that's that was going to float on the surface and maybe drift a Betis emerger, and I'm starting to think those types of thoughts that are, And my wife walks up, has a dry fly on that we've been using in a brook trout stream where they also let you, the one place in the park where let kids use worms, and we come walking up, and without even going down to one knee, Christy's standing there and just casts, and on the first cast, an 18-inch brown hammers her fly, And she brings this thing in. I actually asked her to take a picture of me with it just because, I wanted her to feel like I was part of the whole thing. But the guy in the Corvette sees this, grabs his stuff, takes his rod, opens the trunk to his Corvette, throws the rod in the back, slams it, and peels out, all while looking us in the eye. It was beautiful. It was beautiful. And she, she knows this now. She was, but you don't do that. You don't walk up and stand where you should be fishing, cast where you shouldn't cast, and catch an 18-inch brown on the first cast. It just doesn't happen. God was involved in that.
Oh, that is a beautiful story in so many ways.
I think he broke the rod, by the way. It appeared to me that he broke it. I would have put it back in the tube, but he was in a hurry, apparently.
Well, you definitely don't not break a rod in a Corvette without taking it apart, because there's nowhere to put it if you don't.
Good point.
Well, speaking of stories, because I honestly am enjoying this so much, I don't want to waste your time and so forth, but I could sit here and chat for hours and hours and hours. I'm really genuinely enjoying this. Give us, to kind of roll this out, give us, or to end it around, I guess, or round it off or whatever. Give us maybe, other than the one you just told, maybe that was one of your favorites. That one story, fly fishing, that may just stick out in your mind for whatever reasons. Just lay that out to us and explain it to us, please.
So it was early. It was late in the year 2000. My wife had just got pregnant with what would ultimately end up being our third son number 3. We had three boys and then a girl later. But she's like, I'm pregnant. You're not going to Yellowstone this year. Because she was due on June the 20th. And beforehand she's going to want a lot of help, and she's also going to want me to be around, the whole summer for that. And so I was like, okay, fine. I called around several friends. Nobody wanted to go with me in the springtime. Now the park is closed that time of year, but I had an idea that I would go try to fish the Madison. Never mind that it was 8 degrees when I checked the temperature there in Ennis, Montana. I thought, well, if I'm not going to be able to go this summer, I'm just going to go and probably not catch much of anything. And I didn't catch much of anything. Went one day, third day I was there. I went to no fish. Went to Bear Trap Canyon downstream of Ennis, Montana, and I thought it looked to me like I don't know, carp water or something. Nothing wrong with carp, but I was looking for trout. Ended up going back to my room. There was a guy, an older guy there who, I'm not really a whiskey guy, but he gave me a whiskey and ended up being super cranky the next day when I woke up, slept horribly. And so you can imagine, I'm going, I haven't caught a fish. I don't even know what the point of this is. I'm not even sure I like fly fishing anymore. I hate the world, And so, but I said, you got to get back to Bozeman tonight to get back on a plane. You got some time. Just go out. You really haven't fished the Madison itself, in the best parts. Obviously there's from Ennis, Montana back up to the West Yellowstone, or actually to the lake there at Hebgen Lake and Slide Lake. You've got a 50-mile riffle where it's relatively uniform water and a lot of fish in there. But I decided I'm going to fish really close to the hotel there or the motel there in Ennis. So I go up to a place called 7 Mile Ford. And at 7 Mile Ford, you've got some braiding beginning to happen. The famous braiding that gets close to Ennis Lake is a little bit downstream from there. But you got some braiding, and so there's an island. I go to the access. I mean, it doesn't look like there's been any boats that have pulled out of there, any time in the last week or something. Probably not true, but there's not a lot of guiding going on, when it's cold and overcast and slightly snowy. and just all the conditions are wrong. Cold water. So I go out and I'm screwing around all day, and I finally end up sitting on the bank, just really ticked off, thinking I've just wasted this time. I should have waited till the fall or something. And I see a rise at the lower end of the island by a log, and I'm like, okay, Mother's Day caddis, maybe, I don't know. So I tie on a partridge and orange, I believe, but a wet fly, and I swing it across that spot, and first cast I catch the log, and this is the proverbial log that starts to move. And after about 15 minutes, I'm holding in my trembling hands, and I'm looking back and forth furiously for any human being to see this. A freckled face, 29.5 inch rainbow hen.
Oh my gosh.
And I'm just shaking. And I'm looking for anybody. And so finally I hold her out of the water a little too long, being very gentle, because she may have, had eggs or whatever. And so I let her back gently down into the water, and I'm crying, and the heavens open, and, I'm sort of being pulled away from the earth, and, and so finally a drift boat comes by. I'm like, what? Where were you? And the guy's like, I'm sorry, pardon me? And I tell him the story, and he goes, no. Well, I mean, a little bit more colorful language than this. He says, no, sir, I humbly disagree with your statement that there is a fish approaching 30 inches in this river. That's not exactly how he said it, but you get the idea. So I'm like, I drive all the way to West Yellowstone, because I know that the famous fisherman Craig Matthews is there behind the counter. He used to own the shop. He's since sold it, but Craig Matthews is going to be there. And sure enough, I walk in. Jackie Matthews is standing there, his wife. Says, Craig here? He goes, yeah, he's in the back. Hey, Craig comes out holding a, fly tying material in each hand. And I tell him the story, and he goes, no, I'm sorry, I don't believe you. I mean, this is a guy who's really a nice guy. He says, there aren't any fish that size in the river. And so a few years later, Bob Jacklin, another guide in West Yellowstone, catches a 30-inch brown out of the Madison. And then I hear Craig Matthews say in an interview, I can't find it now. If anybody's able to find it, send it to me. He says, yeah, wow, there are 30-inch fish in here. I know a guy who claimed to catch a fish just under a rainbow, just under 30 inches back in the springtime around 2001. And he's referring to me. And he says, Jacklin's brown was clearly the biggest brown ever caught out of the Madison. And whoever that guy was may have caught the largest rainbow.
Oh, wow.
So there is a God. There's your philosophical argument.
Therefore.
Therefore. ...
Oh man, I love that. Oh man. Well, for sake of people connecting with what you're putting out and when you're putting it out, give us, connect people with you. Give us the name of your Yellowstone blog and your ad Kalios. I always say everything in a Latin. I don't know why I do that, but
that's pretty good, actually.
Okay,
that's probably a better. I would say ad Kylos or ad Silos.
Okay.
Or Chilos, I think is how they say it if you were, in the Middle Ages or something. So the first website, my fly fishing website, is Firehole Canyon, all one word. And there's a story about that. We'll have to do that on the next podcast. But fireholecanyon.com, great place to fish in Yellowstone, by the way. And I've got some photos, a hatch chart, and I've got a blog in there as well, so you can navigate to that fairly easily. And then add Chilos would be ADCAELOS.com, and that's my blog for more theological and philosophical stuff.
And please, everybody, go avail yourself to this. It's well worth it. I promise you. It's thought provoking. There you have it, friends. Jim Swayze. Man, there's not too many times that I have conversations with people through email and over the phone that are complete and utter strangers that I feel like he could just be knocking on the door tomorrow and be like, dude, grab your rod. And it would be like, okay. It wouldn't be weird. And Jim, when you hear this, I genuinely mean that. That's a real blessing to me. So, friends, until the next time, keep your lines wet and your flies in the fish's mouth. God bless.